A couple years ago, I was given the opportunity to go to Alcatraz prison, which I'm sure all of you have heard about, or at least most of you have heard about. But I got to go on this special tour where it wasn't just going through the normal cells, but I got to go underneath the cells to this place called the dungeon. And what the dungeon was is it's where they put the bad prisoners of Alcatraz, where they put the dangerous people, the people that are a threat to the guards or a threat to other prisoners. And they put us down there and turned the lights off and let us just imagine being prisoners for a moment. And it was pretty terrifying, to be honest. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. It was dark, it was wet, it was just a terrifying place. And just the thought of being there for a couple hours, a couple days, a couple years, a couple decades, it's a terrifying thought. And although Alcatraz is closed down, although the dungeon is closed down, solitary confinement still exists. And it's a huge problem in the United States today. And that's what we'll be talking about today. We're talking about what solitary confinement is, why it's a problem, and what we're going to do to change it. So first off, what is it? What is solitary confinement? Well, it's simply just the act of isolating a prisoner, usually as a form of punishment. And although it is prevalent in the rest of the world, nowhere is it more prevalent than in the United States. It used to occur in dark, dirty holes, such as the dungeon under Alcatraz, but now they occur in clean, sterile, well-lit, white-walled rooms of about 80 square feet, which is roughly the size of a king-size bed. And all the prisoners eating, sleeping, defecating take place within this space for usually 23 hours a day. They're allowed 1 hour where they're taken in chains to another place where they can walk in isolation back and forth for an hour before returning to their cell where they remain the rest of the time. And according to an NBC article by Elizabeth Chuck on March 1st of 2014, the average cost of an inmate in solitary confinement is $70,000 to $80,000 every year, which is significantly more than the $21,000 a year for minimum security prison. In the United States, there are 80,000 prisoners in solitary confinement. So if you do the math, that's a big cost, and that's just easily more than any other place in the world in terms of how many prisoners are in solitary confinement. And just to show the flip side, those who defend solitary confinement claim that it is just for the bad prisoners, just for the prisoners that are super dangerous, that are a threat to other people. But we will soon get into how this is just not the case. This is not true, and there are plenty of examples that we'll get into that will show how this is not the case. So what is wrong with solitary confinement? Why is it an issue? Why is it a problem? According to a research report by the American Civil Liberties Union in 2013, solitary confinement can cause significant psychological damage, including cognitive delays, increased suspicion and paranoia, increased anxiety, fear, aggression, and hostility, heightened fears of helplessness and depression, and increased thoughts and attempts of self-mutilation and suicide. This report also showed that solitary confinement is particularly damaging to people with pre-existing mental health problems and for juveniles. And the United States is one of the only countries in the entire world that allows solitary confinement for these two categories. In August 2011, Juan Mendez, who's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, concluded in a CCR research report that 15 days in solitary confinement is the limit, after which irreversible psychological damage can occur to an individual. 2 prisoners in Louisiana just entered their 40th year in solitary confinement. And as for the people who claim, it's not just dangerous individuals who are placed in solitary confinement, but it's all different kinds of people for indefinite periods of time for just a wide variety of reasons. And a collection of research reports by the Solitary Watch in 2014 said that it wasn't just violent acts, but things such as ignoring orders, using profanity, being gay or transgender, being Muslim, having unsavory political beliefs, having reported rape or abuse by prison guards were all instances in which someone was sent to solitary confinement. One example is a group of Rastafarian men in Virginia were placed in solitary confinement for more than a decade because they refused to cut their hair on religious grounds. There are also these things called supermax prisons, which are almost entirely composed of solitary confinement cells and exist in 44 states in the United States. There's Guantanamo Bay, of which 70% of the cells there are solitary confinement cells, but perhaps a better example is in California, which is Pelican Bay State Prison, of which more than 500 of their 1,107 SHU prisoners have been in solitary confinement for over 10 years, and over 80 prisoners have languished in solitary confinement for more than 20 years, according to the Constitutional Rights article for 2013. And I just want you to imagine for a second, just imagine being in solitary confinement for that kind of time. Just imagine, you know, walking back and forth, not having anyone to talk to, the light's always on, just buzzing, just walking back and forth, not knowing what time it is, not knowing what day it is, not having anything to do, not having anyone to talk with, just sitting there day in, day out, day in, day out, just with nothing to do, beating your head against the wall, I guess. But that's going on right now, and it's prevalent in the United States. Anyway, the conditions were so bad at this prison in California that 4 leaders from 4 rival gangs coordinated a hunger strike last summer. And on the first day of the strike, 30,000 prisoners across the state of California refused their meals and refused their food. And they offered up a set of demands, which included ending solitary confinement. So the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation said, okay, end the strike, we'll make these changes to stop the strike. The prisoners stopped the strike, but instead, the prisoners were punished with more prison discipline and actually more solitary confinement for the leaders. And the point here is not that we should listen to every single demand by every prisoner, but rather the point is that this is just a huge issue, such a big issue that 30,000 people did a strike last summer. And also that, I don't know if y'all have heard about this, but I mean, it wasn't in the news, or maybe it was, it's not a hot topic, it's not something that's people are talking about, people are angry about right now. It's fairly not well known topic, and that's a problem, and that needs to change. So these are all problems why solitary confinement is a problem. It makes it more difficult for a prisoner to re-enter society, which thus kind of begs the question, what's the point of prison then if it's not making them better able to re-enter society? It creates mental health problems, or it exacerbates existing mental health problems. It's a huge tax burden financially. I mean, you're all pretty much paying for people to go crazy right now. And honestly, if any of you go to prison, which probably unlikely, but maybe your friends, maybe your cousin, maybe someone you know, your neighbor, who knows, maybe they go to prison, they have the potential of entering a normal person and exiting insane, with mental health problems, with difficulties that just are irreversible. There's also the Constitution, which I think is pretty important in this country, but the 8th Amendment specifically says that cruel and unusual punishment shall not be inflicted on its people. And that's exactly what this is. This is cruel and unusual punishment, and it's against the Constitution. So what should be done? A fact sheet from the Solitary Watch organization in 2011 said that European countries require 2 things. A mental health examination, which thus means, you know, they check the people that go into solitary confinement. So that eliminates all juveniles, all people with pre-existing mental health problems. They're not going to solitary confinement because they have a pre-existing a mental health examination beforehand. And they also have a daily monitoring of their prisoners to make sure they're not losing their mind, to make sure they're not banging their head against the wall. For example, another thing, they have time limits, they have all these restrictions. In Germany, they have an 8-hour time limit for solitary confinement. So it's more of a timeout, realize the mistakes you've done, and now you can go back to becoming a better person that's better fit for re-entering society. So the status quo is slowly changing on some of this United States. A couple of states, in Connecticut and some others, have eliminated or reduced solitary confinement for juveniles or people with pre-existing mental health problems. And there was a Senate hearing last month, actually, about possibly reducing solitary confinement for juveniles and people with mental health problems. But we need to go beyond this. And this is against the Constitution, and it's a huge problem. So we need to completely eliminate solitary confinement. And because, I mean, there's just so many things wrong with it, and there's so many alternatives. If you look at Europe, all these restrictions they have, their system of just penalties and rewards in their prison system, where if you do something wrong, you know, you get something taken away, rather than just being sent to the crazy house for a couple months or years. So, solitary confinement is a huge problem, and it's got to change. Thank you.